Okay, welcome to Computer Science 305 Programming Languages. This is the last lecture on Ruby 3. So, the last thing I really wanted to talk about with this language was its capability for exception handling. So Ruby has not only good exception handling, but pretty robust and can handle pretty much anything that comes its way if you know what you're doing. So a typical place that we use exception handling, for example, in both Java as well as Ruby, C#, anywhere that you kind of need to handle exceptions, is when we're dealing with file I/O operations. So the last Ruby lectures talked about I/O, and so one of the things we typically want to do is try to figure out whether or not something has happened. And so if we do this, one thing we can do is we can just we'll run Ruby straight up from the terminal here. And we could say, let's say IRB. And if we run this, we say file equals open, and then we just give it some file, right? An unknown file name. If we run that, it's going to throw an error, right? That's not what we want. In order to get around this, in typical languages like C, we typically have to check if the file is equal to null. In Java, we know that when we try to open a file, it's going to throw a file I/O exception. So, or just an I/O exception. In this case, in Ruby, we also have a very similar thing that happens. So let's say we create a new method, right? So we call it def first line, and that will take in a file name. And so if we want, we could sit there and say, well, let's go ahead and open file equals open, and we'll do the same sum file, right? We're not going to even deal with file name right now. And what we want to do is we're going to just get the first string from the file. We're going to say info equals file.gets. And then we'll close the file. So file.close, and then we'll say info, right? The first line. It's the last thing evaluated in the function. And so then we end the function, call good. Well, the problem here is we'll have the same error that we had before. So in order to do this, we need to surround everything in a what would be equivalent to a Java try statement, but we'll call it a begin. So we say begin. And then we have three things we can possibly do. The first one is rescue. So rescue is the keyword that says, that starts a block and basically says, we can actually say, we can give the name of the actual exception, but let's not worry about that right now. Rescue just says, in the event of anything bad happening, do the following statements until we reach end. So we have another end at the end here, right? So begin has an end that ends it. We can also have a rescue in there. And so what we say here is, in the case that we couldn't open the file, we'll return nil, right? Before we were returning info, but this time we're going to return nil. Basically, we can annotate this saying, I can't read the file. Then don't return a string. On the other hand, if we can, last thing evaluated is the return value, right? So now this is all great and everything, and so this should solve our problem, right? So if we run this, we can actually, we'll create this. We'll say we'll call first line. Just give it some string, doesn't really matter. And if we go ahead and we'll kill Ruby, say ls Ruby exceptions.rb, and nothing happened, right? It printed nothing, mainly because we should probably say print. All right, actually, let's say puts, so we can see what happens. So we do that, it prints an empty line, right, because we got nil back. Now, on the other hand, if we give it some actual file, like we have another Ruby file in there. We'll call it it's args.rb. And actually, if we just get rid of this and we say file name, right? And this be args.rb. We run this now, and it says reads each line of the file and checks the line, then rewinds the file, right? Which is the first line in the args.rb Ruby file that I have written there. That's all great and everything. Oftentimes, though, and so this is just the generic exception handling framework that we're going to have in Ruby, right? We have our begin statement, and anything between begin and rescue is our normal path of execution. Anything between rescue and end, in this case, in the default case, is the code that's going to handle any exceptions that occur. So we also have this capability, right, where let's say we want we want to get around this, right? There's this capability inside of a rescue to retry what happened. So let's say we couldn't reach the file, right? Let's say we give it the sum file again, right? And then now this time when this occurs, right, we then say file name equals standard in, right, which is the standard in stream, and then what we'll say is retry. All right, so retry keyword tells us that we're going to try the try block, the begin part, one more time, in the hopes that it will actually make it through. So if we run this, right, we run the Ruby exceptions, and so now it failed, and now it's wanting me to type something in. So we'll just type in some random characters, and it's going to keep doing this, waiting for that. So it's going to hit an infinite loop. So I'll go ahead and kill that. Now, so that's and that's not something we need to deal with, right? We need to have some sort of count on our number of tries or something to handle what we're going to do. Now, on the other hand, sometimes, like for example in Java, right, you're running some code, and let's say, for example, you create a method that takes in let's say an integer, right? But you want the integer to be bounded to be greater than or equal to 0, and let's say less than 10. And if it's not, then we can throw an illegal argument exception, which is a runtime type exception in Java, meaning that our method does not declare that it throws that it does not have to declare that it throws that, and will not be caught at compile time. Anyway, in Ruby we can also throw an error as well. So the same way that the IO element, the file, can throw an exception when we call open and the file name doesn't exist, we can also throw an exception ourselves if we ever find the need to. And so I'm going to run Ruby and we'll just talk about that. That we do this using the raise keyword. So for example, we're inside, let's go in the IRB, right? So we're inside Ruby. We can just literally say raise and then give it a string for the message, right? This is an error occurring, and we're going to raise in the message that we're giving it. So let's say test error, and we execute that, and it raises the error, right? Gives us a runtime error in this case because we did it at runtime, and the message that came back is test error. So then we can also say, so if we want to catch something, right? So we'll try run a try catch, right? We'll say begin, and then we'll say raise. We'll say test2, and then we'll say rescue, and then puts an error occurred, and then we so as we said earlier, raise takes in the single argument, the message that we're going to display, right? Well, that value can later be accessed using a special global variable, which is the $exclamation point, which is the name or the message that was it's the argument to the raise keyword, and so we can display that by simply saying $exclamation point, and then we'll go ahead and end the try, right? And as we see here, this time it came around. We ran that the exception handling routine, and we raised that test2, and then we said whenever we catch that, what we're going to do is we're going to output that an error occurred and give the name of the error. So that's nice, Maybe we should go and use that up above in our previous code. So we'll go ahead and exit out Ruby, the interactive Ruby. And instead of saying this, we will actually attempt to output and not retry. We'll say puts an error occurred, and we'll say what we got from the actual message. Instead of it giving us the default debug information, we'll just have it print out what happened. So if we go ahead and run that again, we now see an error occurred, no such file or directory at RB sysopen, right? The sysopen is a built-in Ruby function that's connecting to the underlying operating system's open file function. And so what this says is it couldn't find whatever some file is, which is great, exactly what we'd like to see. All right, so now that we've seen this, so now we know how to handle exceptions, and we can actually throw our own exceptions. We know how to get exception information, and we can print it to the screen if need to. So that's some pretty good stuff. Now, oftentimes, we know that when we're dealing with these exceptions, that there is this need to it's we recall from Java exception handling, and if we don't remember, we'll learn in upcoming. But one of the things that we need to do is have the capability to execute code regardless of what happened. So typically in the rescue section, we want to log information like what error occurred, where did it occur, and why did it occur. So that's always some good logging information to have. But beyond the logging information, we also sometimes want to do things like, I don't know, close a file, like close any open streams, put this, we need to have a block of code where we can put this system back in a stable state. And so in Java, we would call that a finally block, which is the tail end of a try-catch scenario, which always is executed regardless of whatever happens. So if the try went through correctly, the finally is still executed. If we ended up in a catching an exception, the finally is still executed. In Ruby, we also have this capability, right? So, so this is basically it's anytime that we need to clean up our code, right? And so we will go ahead and set this up. There's this optional section that happens after rescue, and it's called ensure. So ensure just says, all right, what we're going to do is we will attempt to handle anything that occurs. So we can execute, right? Let's say we want to open up, we'll say file equals open, and then we'll say test.txt, and we'll use write. So this gives us the capability to actually write to the file, right? So it's going, I believe if the file doesn't exist, it will create it, and it gets us ready to write. So what we'll do is we'll change all of this. But we're going to essentially, in the begin, we will write some default text out to the file. And then in the ensure section, this is where we want to close the file up, right? So regardless of if we found there was an exception, like we didn't have permissions to write to the file or whatever, then we can close the file regardless. So we say file.close in the ensure section, right? We want to make sure this always happens regardless. So once we've done that, we should note that you don't have to have a rescue to have an ensure. Ensure can occur by itself regardless and does not require a rescue to be there. So just to be aware that as long as you have a begin block, you can have an ensure, a rescue, or a rescue and an ensure. It doesn't really matter. So then we can go ahead and let's say I don't know. We'll say file.write. We'll just do the simple hello world. All right, that looks great. So this should work, no problem. And we should see that it will create the file, and it does, right? So nothing bad happened. Except for I did print out LL. I don't know what that's about. But we got hello world there. Yes, it printed out the value of first line. Let's fix that and try it again just to clear that up. All right. So it writes to test.txt. Now, if I go in and change the permissions, right? So we look at let's say change. Oh my God. And then we say, oh my God, have to ls-l, test.txt, rw, so that'd be 1, 2, 5. So it'd be 555. Let me go ahead and change that. So change mod 555. Test.txt and test.txt we have well, that's fine. So we can only read test.txt. We cannot write to it anymore. So if we were to run that same Ruby exceptions at RB, which I'm going to clear, and we say run that, it will actually throw the error again, right? So permission denied, test.txt. So we couldn't open it and didn't catch that exception, right? So maybe what we want to do is have this in here. So we just say file equals file.new, and then we say in this case, we don't want runtime error. File equals open file name, and let's give that a shot. See what happens. So wrong number of arguments, of course. That's just going to cause me all sorts of problems. Actually, let's try it there. Oh, that works. All right. So an error occurred. Oh, and this is on some file again. Hello, Isaac. Pay attention. And we need to call this W and make this test.txt. All right, pay attention. Okay, so nil class. Oh, of course. See, I knew that was going to be the issue. Anyway, but I think we all get the gist, even though my code is not working out the exact way I would like it to. But basically, as long as we can figure out how to get all this to work out, we can essentially operate it using a try-catch. There's many other scenarios where, exception handling. There's many other scenarios where we want to actually operate with this, and there's lots of different exceptions that can occur. I like to think of this as oftentimes when I'm working with things like some of the stuff I do with Ruby tends to be scraping data from the the net and being able to extract information using XML and HTML processing. Oftentimes, there's all sorts of issues with that. You expect some tag to be there, it doesn't exist, or a path using XPath doesn't exist or doesn't work out. And so you oftentimes have to use a lot of these try catches in Ruby, or well, what is the equivalent of a try catch from Java in Ruby for exception hunting. You can also, if you want to explore, and actually I think in the second video for this, I will open up and show you what classes look like inside Ruby. This is not going to be required for anything that you're doing, but just to see a definition of these things would be, I think, interesting. So I'm going to leave the exception handling alone, and I'll jump into classes right after this. But anyway, have a great day, and I'll see you in class later. All right, thanks.